Hi, my name is Lloyd Price, and I am the main builder and driver for the Tabor Toge Masters. We this year fielded the Coronation Scot, which you see before you here. Now it looks a little bit different than it did at Derby. The car has had its body removed. This was always in the plan because we were going to run this car at Eugene Coffin races, so it needs to be rebodied. But while it is bare again, I figured I would do a build breakdown video since we won the engineering award this year. And kind of go through how we made the car, some things we learned on the hill, and some of the ways that we tried to innovate this year. So the video will get more technical as it goes on, so if you ever feel yourself drifting to sleep or your eyes rolling back in your head, it won't hurt my feelings if you cut off the video then. Thank you. So the Tabor Toge Masters have kind of had this philosophy of building mechanically interesting vehicles. And I remember the first time I went to the Derby 3 years ago. I was astounded by the variety of vehicles there. The art cars are always my favorite, and I love seeing the crazy ideas that go on. And so I wanted to join, and I wanted to do my own version of that, but I really like mechanical things, so I wanted to make a mechanically interesting car. And so our first year's car was the Hill Watch car, which was not too mechanically interesting, but it did have a standing position to drive it, which was unique, and it also has a fully articulating steering column through the original steering column of the jet ski, which made it look more authentic. Not that anyone knew that we did that, but it was fun for me anyway. Then the next year, we built Big Daddy Caddy. And the whole idea behind the Big Daddy Caddy was to make a soapbox car that could drift. I am really into cars and motorcycles, and the drift style of driving is really showy and interesting. You know, none of the other soapbox cars on the hill move that way, and so I thought it'd be fun to build a drifting soapbox car. And so we went through a couple design iterations, but we ended up on one with double steering racks, and that actually is what determined our art direction. We knew that the rear wheels turning would be kind of visually striking and kind of distract from the fact that it was drifting. So we designed it around a Cadillac so we could cover the rear wheels and it would look natural, because old cars like that would often have wheel covers. So we could hide the rear wheels, and it would make it look more dramatic. It would make it look like the car is actually drifting. And then this year, we did the Coronation Scot, which you see before you here. And the whole idea behind this car was to make a car that behaves like a motorcycle. Because again, I have a great passion for motorcycling. I ride my bikes year-round, and I wanted to make a car with that kind of handling dynamic. And that two-wheel vehicle handling dynamic is quite an interesting thing, and so I thought it'd be interesting. The problem is that, of course, you have to have 3 wheels for your soapbox car, so it becomes a challenge then to make a car that leans while having 3 wheels in contact with the ground all times. And so we did a little bit of research, and there's actually 3 different ways to do it. And so we picked one of those ways, which we will go into now. Okay, I've taken a wheel off here so we can get a better look at what's going on. But this mechanism right here is the secret sauce of the Coronation Scot, and this is what makes it able to corner like it does, like a motorcycle or a bicycle does. And what it is it's a parallelogram mechanism. So you have a horizontal member here and a horizontal member here, which are connecting together the frame, which is here, to a fork on the outside on either side. So this one is missing its wheel. But what this mechanism does is it allows the wheels to move in this manner relative to the frame. And so what this essentially does is whenever the frame leans over, it allows the wheels to move vertically to each other while staying in line with the frame. And so this allows a tilting motion. So again, this is one of 3 different mechanisms on how to do this, but this one was the simplest, which is why we went with it this year, and it's pretty easy to execute. Now the disadvantages are that it is quite bulky. So I don't know if anybody noticed, but the rear of the car is quite large, and that is because this mechanism takes so much room to move. It constricts the back of the car, so we had to run our air tank and water lines through this area, and that was quite difficult to do. And the other thing it does is as the wheels get farther and farther in angle, they actually get closer and closer together. And so this is bad for a speed car because that is actually lateral rubbing, and so that's going to take away from the energy of the car. So there's another mechanism that we may replace this with if we run this car next year that does not have the lateral scrubbing on it, and that will work better. This mechanism allowed us 45 degrees of lean clearance if anybody's deciding to build a lean car in the future. If you are planning on going real fast like we tried to do, you will need more than 45 degrees of lean clearance because the learning curve is quite a sharp corner, and so I would personally design for 60 degrees of lean clearance next time we do this. So we'll throw the wheel back on and we'll get a different shot of this so you can kind of see how it works in real action. Okay, so before I was kind of showing you the mechanism in a close-up shot, but we had the wheels moving up and down and the chassis staying vertical, but this is not actually how it's used in a real case. So in the real case, the wheels stay on the ground and the chassis is leaning relative to the ground. So you can see I actually have it on the side stand right now, and so it's kind of leaned at a jaunty angle. But I'll cycle it back and forth a few times, just so you can kind of see that mechanism working. And so you can see how the wheels follow the angle of the frame. And the parallelogram allows the wheels to move up and down to compensate for the lean angle. So what I'll do is I'll show you the wide shot now so you can kind of see the car leaning in action. Okay, so now in the wide shot you can really see and kind of see the spirit of what the car is trying to do. So again, it's on the side stand now. So you can cycle the car, I'll put a kickstand. So you can see the car can cycle all the way from here to here, and the wheels move to allow for that. Now, if you're ever going to build one of these things, a lot of people ask, hey, is there some sort of spring return mechanism or something to keep the car upright? And it's actually very important that you don't do that. So this mechanism needs to be free to tilt because it's emulating the performance behavior of like a single rear tire on a bicycle or a motorcycle. And if you can imagine, like, bicycles do not stand up by themselves, and that's because the rear wheel and the front wheel provide no sort of stability. And so if you wanted to have those handling dynamics, which are a very positive thing, you cannot have it resist any sort of movement in this direction. So to kind of demonstrate this, and you can see it in some of my other videos at the races, this car, if you let go of it, will just fall over. So I'll demonstrate that now. Don't worry, it's not hurt. But again, if you're going to build one of these mechanisms, it's very important that it actually has this behavior and it doesn't actually resist any sort of movement. Otherwise, your handling characteristics will be extremely unpredictable. Okay, now that we've looked at the rear of the car, let's look at the other end of the car, which also makes this possible. So the front of the car is just a single front wheel. So this again reduces complexity. There is a way to make the tilt mechanism in the rear also steer, and so you can then put the tilt and steer mechanism in the front and then just have a standard rear tire in the back. But that is quite complex and it doesn't really get you anything. A lot of the Soapbox cars that have the 2 wheels in front and 1 wheel in back, they're doing that for cornering stability because they're cornering flat. But if you're using a car like this, which leans into corners, you don't really care about cornering stability because you are leaning into the corner. The whole idea is that your car is effectively balancing on a line, again, like a motorcycle or a bicycle, and it is not on a large triangular contact patch. For those cars, it is to a distinct advantage to have the two wheels in front, but in this car, it's just fine for the one wheel in front. Now, there's nothing particularly special about this setup. It is very important, though. This was a mistake we made in our first year to have rake. So rake is the angle of this headstock here. It's called rake on a motorcycle. It's called caster for car geometry. But you need this here to make your car naturally stable. So if you take your hands off the handlebar, there's a steering wheel, and your car will track straight. And that is because of this angle. If you do not have that, your car will have horrible instability problems, and the wheels will be flopping back and forth quite violently. So remember to add in rake or caster to your car. You want about 20 degrees. This one is about 30 degrees. We were expecting to go very fast. More rake will give you more stability. So if you look at motorcycles, a super sport motorcycle has about 22 degrees of rake, and a cruiser bike has 35 degrees of rake. So we went for 30 degrees because we wanted stability and we did not need that flickability. But as you notice, the handlebars are not attached here. So we actually have a tie rod here, it's on the other side, which attaches to the fork. And then it goes back to a set of handlebars over here, which are on their own separate steering head. And so this system allows the front wheel to be moved remotely because we have a reclining driving position. It is very important that your tie rod be very stiff. If your tie rod is not stiff, you will have bad oscillations in the front as well. Alright, here we are back at the rear of the car. So we went over the tilt mechanism and then the front end, but there's another important piece that's in the back of the car. So as demonstrated earlier, the car will just fall over. But when you're at the start line of the Soapbox Derby, it is quite embarrassing if you do that, and so you need to keep your car upright. So the way we did that is with this pin mechanism here. And so this rod goes into a hole that's in this plate, which is in one of the horizontal members of the tilt mechanism. And this rod is connected via a brake cable to a lever on the handlebar. And so if you pull that lever, the pin comes out, and this allows the car to tilt. If you tilt the car far enough, you can see the hole where that pin goes in. And then if you let go of the lever like I am now, and you bring the car back to center, the pin pops back in. And so this holds the car upright. Now, I had an issue with it on the day of, where the pin did not go back in, and I did just fall over the finish line. Which is quite embarrassing. Now, the other way to do this is to attach a disc brake to the horizontal member and the caliper to the chassis, or vice versa. We did try that initially, which is why this is here. This actually held a disc brake caliper, and we had the disc brake attached to the chassis. But the bicycle disc brake was simply not strong enough, and so every time we'd come to a stop, we would be hammering on the brake, but it would still just fall over. So if anyone is looking at building one of these, it is recommended that you do a pin mechanism like this and not go for the disc brake, because it is a more robust way of doing things. To control the Coronation Scot, it is mostly from these handlebars here. So we have on the right here, this is our front brake. This is the pin release mechanism that can make the car tilt, as you can see there. This is a horn, which is disconnected right now, and this actually controls a sprinkler valve. So this brake here is the front brake. This is not the only brake on the car, but it is certainly the most effective brake. So this is actually a hydraulically actuated disc brake for a bicycle. Now that may sound pricey, but we actually got it used from a bike shop. There are several used bike shops around Portland. The one that I go to is in Hillsboro. It's Washco Bikes. They have a fantastic selection. Cannot recommend them enough. But if you can find something like this, this is great. This gives you really great brake feel and a lot of brake power. This brake alone was good enough. So the Coronation Scot also has another brake, which is a foot brake, so actuated by this lever here. So you'd step on this, And this controls a brake that is attached to the back wheel. Now this is a standard V-style brake that clamps on the rim. And while this is probably fine for a bicycle, this almost does nothing to slow down the Coronation Scot. So what you got to realize is a lot of these brakes are designed for a bicycle that only weighs, like 20 pounds, but a lot of Soapbox cars weigh 200, 300 pounds. And especially if you're rolling in an art car with 2 or 3 people in it, you really need better brakes than this. And so it is recommended that you go for disc brakes like we have up here on the front brake. This is that hydraulically actuated disc. And this will provide all the stopping power you really need. The other thing to note about this is that this fork is not for a disc brake, but it is actually quite easy to weld the tabs on, and there's a lot of flexibility in placing the caliper. So don't be intimidated by that if you can't find the right fork. It's very easy to fabricate a new attachment point. So this is the brake that is actuated by the foot brake. Again, this is not really something that is super effective for Soapbox cars just because it doesn't provide the kind of stopping power you need. These are very easy to install, but they are very ineffective. So I would shy away from these and highly encourage you to go to disc brakes. Okay, so to discuss the water cannon system, I've laid the car on its side. Now, this year we are using the water cannon as a strategic ballast. So, since you're allowed to eject water, we were messing with this idea where you could have the car heavy at the beginning and light at the end, and that may help you out. If you continue watching this video to the end, I do discuss it when I'm dealing with the stuff on the whiteboard. The water cannon system is actually pretty easy to implement if you want to do something like this. This is the same exact way you do on an art car. And this is how you do it if you want like big water features, so like the Rainmaker style water feature. If you want a small water feature like they did with the Tooth Fairy this year with kind of just a smaller cannon, you can use a standard like a aquarium pump for that or something. But if you want a big feature, this is how you do it. So it is made with 2 separate tanks. So you have the tanks back here, and these hold compressed air. With the PVC tanks, you can really only go up to about 60 psi. If you have some metal tanks, you can go up to 100. But we had issues with the form factor, so we made them out of PVC. And then this underneath the car actually holds the water. And that, under normal circumstances, is not pressurized. And so what happens is you have this valve here that is in between the 2 systems. So you pressurize the air. This leads to the water tank, and then the exit of the water tank is here, which is the nozzle. And you make the nozzle the highest point in the system so the water doesn't come out when you're sitting on the start line. And basically we have the button that's on the steering over there. You hit that button, it opens the sprinkler valve, it lets all the compressed air into the water tank. That forces the water out of the nozzle. And that's basically it. So when you're making a system like this, another thing you need to realize is that when you're filling it with water, so we filled it with water through the nozzle, you have to have somewhere for the air that's in the tank to leave. And so we actually have this here, which we would open, and this allows air to leave as we're filling it with water. And then we'd fill air through here. But that is the water system in general. We went for the big water feature because we were wanting to empty the ballast tank as quickly as possible. I did go over it outside, but I wanted to go over the schematic for the water cannon system because it's a little more clear to see here what's going on. But essentially what you need is you need a water tank, which holds water at just atmospheric pressure, and then you need a compressed air tank, which holds pressurized air. And then all you do is you just put a valve between them. So in this case we use a sprinkler valve, which could be electronically actuated, but you can just use a ball valve, which is what we used on the Big Daddy Caddy. And you fill this with compressed air, you fill this with water, you open the valve, and the water goes out. Now, important things to consider. When you're building this tank, unless you want a valve on the outlet, which is not advised, you need to have your exit above the water tank to prevent the water from spilling out. You also want this nozzle to gather from the bottommost point of the tank. If you gather from the top, as soon as the water drops a little bit, you'll stop getting water out. And you want your air to go in the top for similar reasons. The other consideration to make is that whenever you are filling the water tank, normally we just fill through the nozzle. You want to be able to let the air that is in this tank out, otherwise your water will start backing up and it'll be a big mess. So you put in an air release valve here So you open this valve, fill with water, close this valve, and then open this valve to get the system to discharge. So a thing that's not really talked about a whole lot with the Soapbox stuff is a noisemaker. The rules do require a noisemaker, and it is a very good thing to have on your vehicle. A lot of teams will like buy an air horn or something or bring that. But if you're in a speed car and you're kind of crammed in there, you need to be able to have something that's easily accessible. And so a 12 volt car horn tends to work really well. Now the problem is that a 12 volts lead acid battery like you'd put in your car or motorcycle is quite large. But there's actually another option. So if you look here, this is actually my battery for this. And this is a lithium polymer battery. They use them for drone racing, which I also do. But this provides a lot of juice and makes it very easy to install a standard 12 volt car horn that you can get at Harbor Freight or AutoZone or something. So this is the main kill switch. Do that, the red button on the handlebar, and that's the horn. So I'd encourage people to do that. This is also what runs our sprinkler valve for the water cannon system. I know some builders out there may be intimidated by electricity, but I just want to show you our diagram, wiring diagram for our vehicle. It really is quite simple, and it can help you because you can wire in like a car horn, which is a great noisemaker, as opposed to using the air horn, which can be difficult to fumble with while you're in the cab and racing. So really all this is 12 volt battery, and you should go through a master switch. This is a really good idea. And then you go to your individual switches for your components. So we had a horn this year, and we went to a sprinkler valve. And the horn, we had an intermittent switch. You'd press it and it would do the horn, and when you let go, it would stop. And then this one was a push on, push off switch for the sprinkler valve. Now the trick here is that what you should do with the negative terminal of the battery is, instead of running wires for the negative terminal, you just run the negative terminal to a point on the chassis. Now your chassis is ground, and then for all these components, all you have to do is run the positive to it, and then you also just connect them to somewhere on the chassis. You also don't need a full-size like car or motorcycle battery. You can use these lithium polymer batteries. So they are 12 volts, and they're very small, but they pack a lot of punch and they can push a lot of amps. So a battery like this will let you have fun on the hill all day without issue. If you've made it this far, I applaud your tenacity, and I hope this video has been interesting for you so far. We've gone over all the stuff in the garage for the Coronation Scot specifically, and now we're going to move to the office where I can draw some more diagrams for you and discuss some of the more theoretical aspects. But if you have any questions, any other questions about this vehicle, or you just have any questions about the Derby in general or design of vehicles, I'm more than happy to answer those questions. You can either find me on Facebook, or you can leave a comment below, and I will try and get back to you when I can. Okay, so I want to take a few moments to talk about steering geometry. Besides the brakes on your Soapbox car, steering geometry is the second most important thing to get right on your car. The adult Soapbox Derby on Mount Tabor is interesting because it is not a straight course. If it's a straight course, a lot of the steering geometry stuff becomes not so important, but because it's curved, this adds an interesting engineering challenge, which I quite enjoy. But the three main components about steering geometry that you care about are caster, also known as rake on motorcycles and bicycles, camber, and toe. So we'll go over camber and toe first because they're most simple. But camber is the angle between the wheel and vertical when you're looking at the car head-on. So you'll notice a lot of high-performance vehicles or a lot of highly modified vehicles will have their wheels tilted like this. On those kinds of cars, it is to their advantage because you can imagine as the car goes around a corner, so like imagine this car is going around a tight right-hand corner, it will tend to load up the outside wheel. And when this happens, the outside wheel will tend to flex more vertical. So if you get your camber angle right, the wheel will be vertical when it's maximally loaded, and that will enhance the grip the wheel can supply. Now for Soapbox cars, this really isn't too big of an issue because the cars do not weigh very much. So for most soapbox cars, it's recommended that you actually just go with 0 camber angle, because as you tilt it in like that, you actually put stresses on the bearings and the wheel will not roll as efficiently. You have sideways loading on your bearing, which will slow it down. So it's recommended that you do 0 camber angle. The toe, if you look at your soapbox car from the top, is the angle between the front wheels from the top. And so, obviously you want close to 0 toe, because that will give you the least amount of rolling resistance. And that is true here. On automobiles, they actually put 1 to 2 degrees of toe inwards because that adds some stability. So if your car is like hunting all over the road or something, you may want to try and put a little bit of toe inwards in it, and that can kind of help stabilize it out, and that may be a net positive for you. You never want your toe to be outwards. That causes instability. Alright, and so lastly, we're going to talk about caster and rake. So this is what makes the vehicle inherently stable. So when you take your hands off the steering wheel or handlebars in your soapbox car, it should track straight. And if it doesn't, you have messed up something here with your caster or rake angle. So the angle is the angle between the steering head, where the wheel rotates around the steering axis, and vertical. And so, as you notice, as you increase, when you change this, you actually have a point here where you have the contact patch, and a point here where the axis of rotation, if continued, hits the ground. And this distance is known as your trail. And so the more trail you have, the more stable your vehicle will be. And if you have 0 trail, your vehicle will be highly unstable. So the way that this works is like this. So you can imagine we have our image here, and you can imagine this is looking at the vehicle straight on. Okay? And so this wheel is turned to the side. Okay, somebody is attempting to make a right-hand turn. And so you can see here is the steering axis intersects the ground here. And because of where this wheel is in relation to the steering axis, now the contact patch is off to the side. Okay? But since we're rolling and the wheel has drag, there's a force pulling on that wheel. Okay, so from here you have a force that is pulling it backwards. So in this diagram here, since we're looking at it head on, the force is pulling it directly backwards. Alright, and so what that's going to do is that's going to induce a torque on the steering head that's actually going to try and make this wheel pop back in line. And so this is a very good thing. So as you turn in your car, you notice the steering gets heavier and heavier the farther you get from straight ahead, and that is because of this force. And so when you let go of the wheel, it will pop back straight. If you have this reversed and you turn, it'll get easier and easier when you turn, and then when you let go of the steering wheel, it'll go all the way to lock, right? And this is really bad. So this is why you need a good amount of trail. And the faster you're going, the more trail you need, because this will become more and more effective at riding the vehicle. Now for the leaning car, obviously you have rake, but these two things do not really apply if you have a single front wheel. So you'll always have 0 camber and you always have 0 toe. Alright, if you've been holding on this long, congratulations. You have made it to the super nerd out section of the video. So what we're going to do now is we're going to kind of look at we're going to analyze the Tabor situation, we're going to look at some of the mathematics and choices behind the things you should do to make your car fast. This also kind of explains why we tried to do our water ballast system this year, where we could change the weight of the car mid-run, because there is an advantage to that if you look at the theoretical models. So what we're first going to do is we're first going to look at all the forces acting on your soapbox car. Okay? So the different forces you have are the force of gravity, you have the normal force, which is the force that is holding your car from falling through the ground, you have your force of air resistance, your air friction, and your force of rolling friction. Okay, so all of these forces combine to give you the net force that is pushing you down the hill. Okay? So what this ends up looking like is you have your force of gravity, which is helping you go down the hill, minus your rolling friction and minus your aerodynamic friction. Okay, those things are the things that are holding you back. And if you write them out with all of their constants and everything, you get mass times acceleration in the direction the car is moving is equal to the mass of the car times gravity times sine of theta, where theta is the angle of the hill. So if your hill is at 0 degrees, sine theta is 0, and so this term does not help you. If your hill is very steep, this term gets larger and larger. From that, you subtract your rolling friction, which is the normal force, times your coefficient of friction. So you have your mass times gravity times cosine of theta, that's your normal force, times your coefficient of friction, mu. And then lastly, you have your aerodynamic friction. So your aerodynamic friction is equal to your coefficient of drag, which is determined by the shape of the body and the texture of the paneling and that kind of stuff, times your frontal area, times the density of the medium you're moving through, in this case air, times your velocity squared over 2. Okay. So let's first talk about your gravity terms. This is the only thing helping you down the hill. And you can see you cannot change the angle of the hill. You cannot change gravity. So the only thing you can actually do is make your car heavier. And this will increase the term that is actually helping you down the hill. This is why in soapbox derby competitions or in pinewood derby competitions, oftentimes there's a maximum weight set. Because if you have a heavier vehicle, it will tend to go faster. Now, this is not wholly true. If you make your soapbox car weigh 2 tons, I bet it's not going very fast down the hill. And that is because the mass also slows you down. So when you're looking here, you have your mass times gravity times cosine of theta. So again, you can't control gravity or cosine of theta, but you can control your mass, and you can control your coefficient of friction. Okay, so if you want a low coefficient of friction, you want things like very good wheel bearings, and you want things like very hard tires. Now again, on Tabor, you kind of have to mix and match these things because you have to make a hard corner. And if you have tires that are made of, plastic, they will roll great and have very low friction, but when you go to make the turn, you won't make it. So this was actually one of the reasons we went the leaning car, because we found dual compound tires. And so these tires have hard rubber down the middle cord of the tires, and they have soft rubber on the outside. So as we are going down the hill, and we're going straight down Blood Alley, we're on the hard rubber. We're picking up a lot of speed. We're going fast. And then when we get to the learning curve, you lean over, and suddenly your tire compound changes to where it's now soft, and it gives you the grip to go around the corner. So this softer will slow you down a little bit more, but you're only using it when you need it. When you don't need it, you have the hard rubber. If you have a car that corners flat, you are stuck with the same rubber compound all the time. So that was one of the advantages we saw in a leaning car. Okay, we also then go to our aerodynamic drag. So in this here, obviously you can't control the density of air. 2 is a constant. You're trying to maximize velocity. So velocity is going to go up. All right, the higher velocity is, the better it's going. So, but you notice velocity is squared. The faster you go, the more and more this term becomes the dominant term. And you can kind of do some rough calculations for yourself to determine when that crossover point is. But it's upwards of like 40 miles an hour, 35, where this term starts being significant. Then you have your frontal area and your coefficient of drag. Both of these things you can control. So the coefficient of drag is determined by the shape and texture of your body panel. So you want your body to be as smooth as possible. So you want it like sand it down, wax that sucker, make it smooth so the air slides right over it. Our car this year is made of foam board. It was quite rough. We did not do a very good job there. But this also is the body shape. And we did do a pretty good job on the body shape. So our car, this is another advantage of the leaning mechanism, our car did not have any outrigger wheels on it because we did not need them. The outrigger wheels have kind of an outsized influence on your coefficient of drag. Anything's just kind of sticking out there has more drag associated with it than something that is larger. And so our whole car could be contained within one body because we could bring our wheels right next to each other. In a flat cornering car, you can't do this because in the learning curve, your car will just fall over if you don't have a wide enough wheelbase. So this was another advantage of the leaning car. Now, that was good for coefficient of drag. It turns out, though, that our frontal area, I think, went up. It was very difficult for us to get a smaller car, in part because I'm the driver and I have pretty broad shoulders. The car ended up being kind of large, and our tilt mechanism was rather bulky, and so that increased our frontal area. So those are the factors there. Now what you'll notice that if you remember your math class, you can take this whole equation and divide by m. So if you divide by m, the m's go away here and they end up here. And this kind of more illustrates why it is important for there to be a limit cap on the weight. Because your acceleration actually improves the more and more you have this term up here, because having more mass effectively reduces the effect of air friction. Your body shape does not change with how much weight you have. And so having more weight means the air is pulling against the car, but it just doesn't have as much pull, or it doesn't have as much effect because the car is very heavy. So the way I kind of imagine this is if you were in an airplane and you had a bowling ball, and then you had a bowling ball that you somehow hollowed the middle out of. If you dropped them both out of the airplane, I think everyone would agree that the hollowed out bowling ball would be held more by the air, and so it would drop slower. And so that's kind of what's happening here. Now, you know, everybody knows, oh, everything falls at the same rate, but that everything falls at the same rate in a vacuum. We're not in a vacuum, we're in air. And so that term starts making a difference. If you are in a vacuum, you can see this term goes away because your density goes to 0. And so then everything does fall at the same rate, regardless of mass. Okay. Now, let's look at it a little bit different way. So this is, again, this will deal with your wheel selection. So on Tabor, you have a certain elevation change, and that's all of your energy. So it's all potential energy. So your potential energy then is going to get converted into kinetic energy plus your rotational energy, and then you have heat. And heat is basically due to the frictional forces. Okay. We're not going to worry about too much of that here. That's what this equation is kind of covering. You're just trying to minimize this term as much as possible. But the important thing to note here is your potential energy does not only go into the kinetic energy, which is moving the car forward, it also goes into the rotational energy of the wheels. Okay, the wheels have to rotate to get your car down the hill, but your wheels are just going, the wheels are just going around. They're not actually contributing to the car moving forwards. So any energy that's going into the wheels is not going into making your car go forwards. And so if you're building a speed car, it's very important to have very light wheels and wheels with, in reality, you want wheels with a small moment of inertia. And moment of inertia is your mass times the radius from the axis of rotation. So if you can imagine, you could have a very light wheel, but very large diameter, and it would have the same moment of inertia as a heavy wheel that's small diameter. And so you can see this here. So your kinetic energy, if we rearrange this a bit, your kinetic energy is equal to your potential energy minus your rotational energy minus your heat. So you have 1/2 mv squared, which is your kinetic energy, is equal to mgh, which is your potential energy, minus your moment of inertia times your angular velocity squared over 2. Okay? So this angular velocity term is the term that kind of insinuates it's better to have larger wheels. So if you have a very small wheel, like you can imagine in the extreme case you have a skateboard wheel, right? In order for a skateboard wheel to go 20 miles an hour, it has to rotate a lot faster than a road bike wheel has to rotate to go that same speed. And so your angular velocity, which is squared, ends up going a lot. So even though the skateboard wheel has a smaller moment of inertia than the road bike wheel, because of the angular velocity, it may not be as efficient. So you want to kind of pick a wheel that reduces this term as much as possible. Now, unfortunately, since we're not all making custom wheels here out of carbon fiber, your choices are limited, and honestly, almost everybody ends up going with a 20-inch BMX wheel just because of availability, and it kind of hits that sweet spot. Now, you could go with 26-inch wheels. This may be an advantage because the road surface is deteriorating, and a larger wheel rolls over imperfections better. Now, if you have a flat cornering car, there's a lot of lateral load on the wheels, and so you can end up tacoing a rim or something as you're going around the learning curve. You may need to stabilize that. This is actually another advantage of the leaning car. Since the car is leaning, all the forces on the wheel are in line with the wheel plane. So you can run like narrow road bike wheels if you want, and they will not taco because there's no lateral load on the wheel. All the forces are in line with the wheel plane. We did not end up doing that. We ended up running a BMX wheel because, again, you can reduce your frontal area, and that often is more important. So you'd be trading off, if you went for a bigger wheel, you'd basically be looking to minimize this term at the expense of making this term larger. So again, it's all kind of a trade-off, and you kind of got to experiment with different things, but those are the things to consider. Now, this brings us to why we did the water ballast tank. So, if your car is heavy, you are reducing this factor. If your car is light, you are reducing this factor. So, the idea is that you hold a lot of water in your car as you go down the top curves and then you go down Blood Alley. Now this is supposed to be a topography and, not to scale or anything, but if you notice Blood Alley, after Blood Alley into the learning curve, you've dropped most of your potential energy, okay? So from this point on, all your weight that was helping you get down the hill is not really going to help you that much anymore. So you, at that point, would be wise to jettison as much mass as possible. Because if you could do that, you will reduce your rolling resistance, and that will help you maintain speed until the end. And so that was our idea behind the water cannon this year. Now, when you do lose your mass, suddenly this term starts to become more effective. So there is something we said there. There's also the push start to consider. And the push start obviously is much more effective whenever your car is lighter. Our car this year was 200 pounds dry, 275 pounds with full ballast. There was a definite difference at the start between the two pushes. The 200-pound car got off the line very quickly. The 275-pound car was quite slower. Now, it did start to pick up more speed as it was getting to the end of Blood Alley. But again, since our car couldn't go around the learning curve, that really didn't help us this year. But it is still an interesting idea that I may mess around with. I'll probably go actually for a lower weight range. The 200-pound car, it turns out, was still accelerating pretty good at the end of Blood Alley. And so I think the 150 to 200-pound weight range is probably optimal because of the push start. You can get a more effective push start, and you'll still be accelerating even with a 200-pound car at the end. So anyway, that is the full analysis we did when we were talking about our car and all the different things that we kind of took into consideration in order to try and go fast. So hopefully this helps you as well.